I'm not going to try to convince them to have something that they don't need, right? And that just got me thinking is those are the best relationships to have, right? Because the CFO stare that I give, it's not about disbelief. It's about stewardship, right? Like how can we work together? What do you have that's going to help my business? And in return, it's going to help your business, right? It's just this ongoing relationship. And those relationships that you form are those networking relationships that, the next thing that the next business that you're going to be at, or the next opportunity, you're going to go back to that person because you earned that trust, and it's both ways.
B2B sales isn't broken, it's blind. Buyers don't see your value, deals die in the budget queue, and the best solution doesn't always win. Guy Talk brings the voices reshaping how you sell, win, and grow. That's Guy Talk, hosted by me, Guy Mobley. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Guy Talk podcast. I'm your host, Guy Mobley, and this is the podcast where I sit down with C-suite executives, go-to-market strategists, operators, investors, and really dig down into what makes great businesses great, what makes great sellers great, and how you distinguish value across your business. And today I'm joined by Heather Costello. She is a founder of a fractional CFO and financial advisory firm. She's a partner here at Beyond Banyan, where she's also the chief operating officer, and we regard her as the boss. And she's led multiple organizations through complex system integrations, go-to-market decisions throughout the business, always making sure that value is aligned with strategy. Heather, thank you so much for joining me on Guy Talk.
Thanks for having me, Guy.
I gave a very, quick and brief introduction, and I don't think I've ever appropriately heard, about your career and how you became the CFO you are today. So could you just share a little bit about your experience in that journey?
Of course. It started a while ago when I worked for an accounts payable auditing firm with retired CEOs and CFOs, and it was a great experience that I had. Um, it it was basically helped me to be who I am today. I began working in the field with the auditors, and they basically taught me that um, there's people behind the numbers, and you have to look at the entire process. And as you look at the entire process, that makes you successful all around. Um, and as I left there, it made me successful in the staffing industry. There's a lot of movement there, and that there's, people behind the numbers. And I developed in this CFO that inside operating environments where decisions had consequences. I mean, every environment, decisions has consequences, but this was more of not just looking at the numbers. You needed to look at the entire big picture.
Yeah, I think you said something there that I really like, that um, there's people behind the numbers. And I think that just goes and disproves like a major misconception that I had of CFOs, where they generally only care about like price and the price tag. Um, and I don't know if many people still hold that same belief or misunderstanding. But you know, you wrote a great newsletter about when a CFO stops believing and starts asking for proof around a value story. And you've passed on deals where the math actually worked on paper, but it strategically didn't fit in. Um, how do you really distinguish from, you know, isolated ROI that a solution may bring, or that sellers promise, which can look good on paper or on a spreadsheet, and kind of integrated value that actually moves the needle in a strategic sense throughout your business or company?
ROI tells you if something works, right? Integrated value tells you if it works here, right? So, I've had situations where people would come like, we have to hire this person. This person is going to we're going to build revenue. It's going to be out of the park. Um, And, they come with this plan, but then as you dig deeper and you look into this, it's like, okay, yeah, the end result shows that, we should be bringing, this should bring like 5% to the bottom line, right? Um, but then you look at the entire plan and you're like, this model really does not integrate with our model. So it's just a quick win, you know. Uh, and sometimes business decisions have to be on quick wins. They do. You do have to gamble, otherwise nobody would ever, you know, be successful because a lot of people take a gamble. But sometimes when you look at the big picture and the friction that comes along with it, um, will end up costing longer in the costing more in the long run.
Yeah, that's another great thing that ties in, I think, perfectly to something that you also said in the newsletter when you say friction. Like a tool can work well on its own and still ultimately erode value by creating friction everywhere else. Do you have, maybe an experience or an example of uh, where that had happened when you're trying to make a decision and you're like, this is great, it makes sense, but I really think it'll cause problems everywhere else?
Yeah, I worked with this one organization that I'm telling you, they had every single tool that you can imagine. And they would get another tool and another tool in order to be like, hey, why isn't revenue increasing? Why isn't our bottom line increasing? Let's go get another tool, right? But then what you had to do is you had to look at all the different revenue streams. You then, what often happens is that you have all these different shared services and the shared costs. And if those things aren't allocated properly, it doesn't tell the true story of what is truly happening. So you need to evaluate, a tool isn't going to solve anything. It is the entire process. Is that going to solve it? So you have to look at the numbers and you have to then look at the integrated process. Are people are going to use this tool? Does it fit in your model? If it doesn't fit in your model, is it something that you are willingly um, to change? In order to bring value to the bottom line. And it ultimately comes down to um, your team collaborating, right? Finance can tell you one thing, sales can tell you another, operations can tell you another. You guys, you have to actually work together and collaborate in order for the system to work.
Yeah, that's huge when you think about shared responsibility and continuing to make sure that the the solution you're trying to install is, you know, a shared accountability between both the people that are telling you the solution will deliver upon it, but making sure that you as an organization are living up to those same standards that you promised. Hey, we're going to drive this here to make sure that this works in the long run, right? Because, like you said, like a tool on paper shows that it works, but is the organization actually capable of driving impactful results? I think one of the great things you also said there was when you say, and this is kind of more referencing to that newsletter that I hope everyone goes and reads after this podcast, is you've made bold moves of saying no to deals where ROI and the previous things that would be good indicators that, hey, this solution's worth our time. Um, and you mentioned a payroll system in the newsletter. Um, and you ultimately said no because it didn't fit into that long-term operating model. I'm interested to see and to hear your experience on the times where you actually walked out of the room after a conversation and you said, you know what? Like, yes, I think this is a solution that's worth our time. And what was different in those conversations versus the conversations where you said no?
Ultimately what I was talking about in the newsletter too, I did eventually say yes. So, I mean, that drives to what you're asking me. It was just no at the time, right? Sometimes leaders feel pressured from all around, like especially when the numbers jive, right? But then when you look at the bigger picture and you're like, man, the cost of actually implementing this now, my staff is not ready for it. It's just not the right timing. It is the right price. But you know what? Later, there's usually still a good price, right? So it's just a matter when you look at the entire picture, um, is it gonna fit in now or later? Because you don't want it to be that, you had people say, "Oh," you have people saying, "Well, we could always change." Oh my gosh, that's another cost that's associated with it, right? You're taking steps back because when you're doing these system integrations, a lot of times you're doing dual entry, making sure that it's working, moving on forward, and you have to make sure that your headcount is there to so to not disrupt uh the day-to-day operations, right? So, you need to look at the entire model and get collaboration from everybody um in order to make sure that it works. It can't just be, let's just do this now because the price is right and we're going to actually reduce costs by doing that. There's a lot more to that. It's not just the price of the product. There's a lot more costs that are associated with it. And when you implement these tools, there's usually a trickle down effect. By implementing this, what else are you going to save somewhere else? And if that is not within your process, then you know, it's not going to work in the long haul. And guess what? You'll probably be switching again because I've seen it happen.
Right. And, I think, you just said we said no. I said no in the beginning, and then I said yes down the road. Do you think that decision led to a stronger strategic partnership between you and that vendor in the long run? And well, I'll stop there and let you answer that question before I ask you the next one.
No, definitely. You know, that person was then able to understand I wasn't just saying no to be, difficult, right? I was saying no, it didn't work right now. Didn't work right now. And later down the road, when I came back and said, "Hey, I think we're ready now. What do you have now?" Um, it also happened to be that their product developed more efficiently in order to help us. So that timing, it was just perfect, right? You really should never be pushed into something when the big picture is not clear.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson for sellers to take away as well. Um, Manny Menendez, another partner. I mean, you know Manny. So
Yes.
one thing he told me very early on, he's like, as a young sales professional, you need to understand that just because someone tells you no doesn't mean it's no forever. And the words he used is let your no's be your pipeline for down the road. Um, and I've always kind of seen that now as, even when I'm on the receiving end of scrutiny, especially scrutiny from a CFO, I think a lot of maybe it's a young sales professional thing. Maybe it carries on throughout many people's career. But when you start receiving financial scrutiny, how can leadership teams stop seeing this as a roadblock and start seeing it as a opportunity to, demonstrate your value um, and really gain the confidence and credibility that a CFO needs from sellers?
In situations like that, becomes key when finance becomes a partner instead of a gatekeeper, like, somebody that's sitting here like no entry, right? Sorry. Um, you know, it comes with pure collaboration with the seller with the buyer. I referenced in my newsletter the CFO stare, right? And you do see that a lot. It, we typically, you sit back in meetings and the CFO listens. They listen to every single aspect. And as that's happening, the wheels are churning. And I look at a salesperson as and this is, also not 100% right in my part, but I look at him like they're just trying to sell me something that I don't need, right? I don't need this. Why are they doing this? We could do it ourselves. But then you have to think of all those different assumptions that you're making, right? And when those assumptions are visible, you're like, okay, wait, no, I need to back off. Do I need this? Do I need this now? Why would I need this? What's the cost associated with this? I need to learn more about this, because my initial thing is like, what is this going to bring to the bottom line? And when is it going to bring something to the bottom line? But you need to look at the big picture. Yes, that ultimately is the case, but there are other costs that aren't visible, that's what value management brings into place, right? Um, Value management to me was a new term, but it was something that I was always doing, right? I've always integrated that in my thought process. Um, what value is that what is it going to bring to me? What is it going to bring to me in the short term? And what is it going to bring to me in the long term? And what bottlenecks or bumps are going to be along the way, right? And when you partner with everybody and you collaborate, um, that's when finance isn't, you know, isn't the gatekeeper anymore, right? They look at it as like, oh, okay, I could see that now, right? Not because not everybody has the finance mind, right? Everybody has their own unique traits that can bring a decision full circle and bring it to life.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. From the conversations that I've had with our team and with you, and understanding we really don't want to we want to align ourselves as strategic partners. And that's crucial from a vendor buyer relationship, right? Because if it's always like, oh, we're sitting across the table from one another, it's how can I make sure that you're not lying to me and that this is actually worth my time and that I actually need it, right? Um, but if there's anything that I can take away from our conversation is how much of a focus you have actually had on the bigger picture across the board, which I feel most people understand. Like, yes, CFO is always going to look at the bigger picture. What are all the implications that could come from implementing a solution, even outside of price, which goes back to that misconception I had earlier. But I think now it's even more important in my understanding that if you're still pitching based on features and functionality, it's never going to resonate with a CFO, right? Because they need to understand what is the underlying value and impact that you're ultimately trying to bring to my business. That's what's going to resonate with your buyer persona, and what ultimately is going to get you to either say no, like this conversation isn't worth our time, and this solution's not going to actually drive a difference, and versus a yes when you leave the room saying, "Hey, I understand what they're doing." Would you say that's accurate or correct?
I do. And one thing I want to mention too, it's been really like a breath of fresh air working with all my colleagues here at Beyond Banyan, um, you know, with all different sales background, right? I think it had me put a different light and perspective on sales reps, right? I remember once talking with Ryan, and he is like, I could sit down with somebody and going to sell them something, and I could tell, you know, pretty quickly, if this product is going to work for them, right? I'm not going to try to convince them to have something that they don't need, right? And that just got me thinking is those are the best relationships to have, right? Because the CFO stare that I give, it's not about disbelief, it's about stewardship, right? Like, how can we work together? What do you have that's going to help my business? And in return, it's going to help your business, right? It's just this ongoing relationship. And those relationships that you form are those networking relationships that, the next thing that you're gonna the next business that you're gonna be at, or the next opportunity, you're gonna go back to that person because you earned that trust. And it goes and it's both ways.
That's an excellent point to certainly end this podcast off on as well. Heather, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Guide Talk. This isn't going to be the only one, so I'm looking forward to having you back on. And just thank you again for joining.